The great hall of Station Nexus Prime stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, and its crystal walls caught the light of 3 artificial suns that hung suspended in the darkness above the assembly floor. It was a place built to inspire awe, to remind every visitor that the Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years and would continue to do so for 12,000 more. 47 species held seats in this chamber, each one claiming to represent the highest achievements of civilization, each one believing themselves to be the rightful masters of their corner of the galaxy. They called themselves the Elder Races, and they had grown comfortable in their power, fat with the tribute that flowed from younger species who had no choice but to obey their commands. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone at the petitioner's platform, a small circle of white stone that sat far below the towering seats of the council members. She was 53 years old, with gray streaking through her black hair and deep lines around her eyes that spoke of too many years spent fighting battles she could never win. She had come to this chamber hundreds of times over the past 15 years, always asking for the same thing, always receiving the same answer. Humanity wanted equality, and the council wanted humanity to wait. High Arbiter Kefvala rose from his seat at the center of the assembly, his insectoid body gleaming like polished obsidian under the artificial lights. He was ancient even by the standards of his species, having served on the council for over 600 years, and he had never once voted in favor of elevating a younger species to full membership. To him, humans were little more than clever animals who had stumbled upon space travel by accident. The council has reached its decision regarding the human petition, he announced, his voice clicking and buzzing through the translation matrix that allowed all species to understand one another. The request for full membership status is denied, as it has been denied 17 times before. Elena felt nothing at these words because she had expected them. What she had not expected was what came next. Furthermore, Kefvala continued, the council has determined that humanity must pay reparations for the Kellan border incident of standard year 7842. 3 of your 5 colony worlds will be transferred to the Zethrani Consortium as compensation for the ships destroyed during that conflict. A murmur ran through the assembly, and Elena saw several of the younger species representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Kellan border incident had been a clear case of Zethrani aggression, and humanity had won that fight fairly and legally under council law. This demand was nothing more than theft dressed up in diplomatic language. Additionally, Kefvala said, and now Elena could hear something like satisfaction in his alien voice, your military fleet will be reduced to 40 ceremonial vessels, effective immediately. All other ships will be surrendered to council control for decommissioning. These terms are non-negotiable, and compliance is expected within 1 standard year. The chamber fell silent as every eye turned to the small human woman standing alone on the petitioner's platform. They expected tears, perhaps, or angry protests that would accomplish nothing. They expected her to beg, as humans have begged so many times before. Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years learning how the council worked, studying its history, understanding the web of alliances and rivalries that held it together. She had watched them dismiss humanity again and again, treating her species like children who needed to be disciplined, rather than equals who deserved respect. She had sent reports back to Earth detailing every insult, every injustice, every moment of calculated cruelty. And Earth had listened. She thought of her grandfather, who had been among the first humans to make contact with the Council 3 centuries ago. He had been so hopeful then, believing that joining the galactic community would bring peace and prosperity to all of humanity. Instead, it had brought exploitation and humiliation, a slow grinding oppression that never quite became bad enough to justify rebellion, but never eased enough to allow dignity. She thought of her daughter, born on a space station because Earth's population controls made it illegal for Elena to have children on her home planet. The Council had imposed those controls, claiming that humans bred too quickly and needed to be managed. Her daughter had never seen Earth's blue skies or felt its wind on her face. She thought of all the young humans who had grown up believing they were inferior, that their species was somehow less worthy than the ancient races who looked down on them from their crystal thrones. How many dreams had been crushed? How many brilliant minds had been wasted because the Council refused to let humanity reach its potential? No more. Elena straightened her spine and looked directly at High Arbiter Kethvaler, meeting his compound eyes without flinching. The translator device at her throat hummed softly as she spoke, carrying her words to every corner of the vast chamber. "We refuse." The silence that followed was absolute. For a long moment, nothing moved in the great hall of Station Nexus Prime. Then chaos erupted. Counselor Yethana of the Telvari rose from her seat with a cry of alarm, her silver skin flashing with bioluminescent patterns of distress. The Zethrani ambassador was shouting something about consequences and military action. A dozen other representatives were demanding clarification, certain they had misheard. High Arbiter Kethvaler slammed his ceremonial staff against the floor, the sharp crack cutting through the noise and restoring order. His eyes fixed on Elena with cold fury. "You cannot refuse," he said, his voice deadly calm. "No probationary species has ever refused a Council mandate. The consequences would be severe beyond anything your primitive minds can imagine." Elena smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Then I suggest you start imagining, High Arbiter, because humanity is done asking for permission to exist. We came to this galaxy with open hands and hopeful hearts, and you answered with chains and contempt. That was your choice, and now we are making ours." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. At the doorway, she paused and looked back one final time. "You have 1 year to reconsider your terms," she said. "After that, we will no longer be accepting communications from the Council. If you send ships to enforce your mandate, they will not return. This is not a threat, High Arbiter. It is a promise." Then she was gone, and the Galactic Council erupted into pandemonium behind her. The old order had just received its first crack, and none of them yet understood how deep it would go. Within 72 hours of Ambassador Vasquez's departure from Station Nexus Prime, every human in Council space had vanished. Diplomatic missions closed overnight, their staff boarding transport ships that jumped to faster-than-light speeds before anyone could stop them. Merchant vessels abandoned their cargo at station docks and fled toward Sol System. Human workers on mining colonies and research stations packed their belongings and left without explanation, leaving behind confused employers and half-finished projects. The Council had never seen anything like it, and at first, they did not understand what they were witnessing. Species did not simply withdraw from galactic civilization, not after 3 centuries of integration. It was unprecedented, unthinkable, and deeply unsettling. High Arbiter Kethvaler dismissed the exodus as theatrical desperation, a meaningless gesture designed to gain sympathy from the younger species. He assured the Assembly that humanity would come crawling back within months, begging for forgiveness and accepting whatever terms the Council chose to impose. But the months passed and the humans did not return. Instead, something far more troubling happened. The intelligence networks went dark. For 300 years, the Council had maintained an elaborate system of surveillance over humanity, embedding agents in their governments, tapping their communications, monitoring their military capabilities. It was standard practice for probationary species, a way of ensuring they never became a threat. Now, every embedded agent had been identified and expelled. Every surveillance satellite had been destroyed. Every quantum-tapped relay had gone silent. The Council's eyes and ears within Sol System had been completely and systematically eliminated. Counselor Methrak of the Zithrani Consortium pounded his tentacles against his speaking platform in fury. "This is an act of war," he declared, his skin flushing purple with rage. "They have attacked our intelligence assets and closed their borders against us. We must respond with overwhelming force." The assembly murmured agreement, and within days, a peacekeeping fleet of 200 warships had been assembled. The Zithrani contributed the bulk of the force, eager to claim their promised colony worlds, but ships from a dozen other species joined them. It was the largest military operation the Council had authorized in over 1,000 years. Admiral Kethsilver of the Zithrani flagship Eternal Dominion broadcast a final warning to Sol system before departing. "Open your borders and surrender your fleet, or face complete annihilation. You have one standard day to comply." There was no response. The fleet entered faster than light travel, confident of victory. They expected to find a frightened species hiding behind a handful of outdated warships, desperately hoping for mercy. They expected easy conquest and minimal casualties. They were wrong. Far from the fleet's trajectory, in the cold darkness between stars, Admiral Shen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the TSS Defiance and studied the tactical display with calm eyes. She was 61 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and a scar running down her left cheek from an accident in her youth. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment, training in secret, building in shadow, waiting for the day when humanity would finally stand up. "Status report," she said, her voice steady and controlled. Commander James Okonkwo, her executive officer, pulled up the latest data. "The Zithrani fleet will arrive in 37 hours. All defense platforms are online and functioning at full capacity. The main fleet is assembled and ready for deployment." Chum nodded slowly, her eyes moving across the display. 4,000 warships waited in the darkness, hidden by stealth fields that the Council did not know existed. Each ship carried weapons that human scientists had developed in secret over 3 centuries. Technologies that were supposed to be impossible. Breakthroughs that had been hidden from Council inspectors and surveillance systems. The Ur Cloud, that vast sphere of ice and rock at the edge of Sol System, had concealed humanity's greatest secret. A network of shipyards and research stations that had been building this fleet for 200 years. Every scrap of metal, every piece of technology, every gram of fuel had been transported in secret, assembled in darkness, tested far from watching eyes. And there was more, much more, that even the fleet did not know about. "What about the civilian population?" Chun asked. "Are the evacuation protocols complete?" Okonkwo nodded. "All non-essential personnel have been moved to the deep colonies. The Council still has no idea they exist. Those deep colonies were humanity's greatest achievement and most closely guarded secret. While the Council had monitored Earth and its 5 official colony worlds, humanity had been spreading through the galaxy in secret, establishing hidden settlements and systems that the elder races had overlooked or abandoned. There were now over 50 billion humans scattered across 100 secret worlds, and none of them appeared on any Council database. For 3 centuries, humanity had played the role of the obedient servant, accepting insults and exploitation while secretly preparing for the day when the mask would come off. They had learned from every species they encountered, studied every technology they could access, and improved upon everything they found. The Council thought they knew what humans were capable of. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. Chum turned to her communications officer. "Send a message to Parliament. Tell them the enemy is approaching, and that we are ready. Ask if there are any final orders." The response came within minutes, a single line from the United Earth Parliament, passed by unanimous vote. No negotiations. No surrender. No mercy for those who come with hostile intent. May history remember this day. Chun read the words and felt something shift inside her. a weight lifting that she had carried for her entire life. For generations, humans had bowed and scraped and begged for scraps of dignity from species that despised them. That era was over. She turned to face her crew, men and women from every corner of human space, all of them volunteers, all of them ready to fight and die for the chance to change their species' destiny. "You know why we are here," she said, her voice carrying across the bridge. "You know what the Council has done to our people, how they have treated us, what they have taken from us. Today, we show them what happens when you push humanity too far." She raised her hand and pointed at the tactical display, where 200 enemy warships were racing toward their doom. "They think we are weak. They think we are afraid. They think we will break and run at the first sign of their precious fleet. Let us teach them otherwise." A roar of approval echoed through the bridge, and across 4,000 ships, crews prepared for battle. The silence was about to end, and what followed would shake the galaxy to its foundations. The Zithrani peacekeeping fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sol System, their sensors immediately scanning for the human defense force they expected to crush within hours. Admiral Kefsover sat upon his command throne aboard the Eternal Dominion, his tentacles wrapped around the armrests in anticipation of an easy victory. "Report," he commanded, his voice echoing through the massive bridge. "Where is the human fleet?" His sensor officer hesitated, her scales rippling with confusion. "Admiral, I am detecting approximately 40 vessels in defensive formation near the third planet. They match the known specifications for human military ships. However, there appears to be something else." "Something else?" Kefsover repeated, his eyes narrowing. "Explain." Before the officer could respond, the tactical display erupted with thousands of new contacts. Ships were appearing from nowhere, dropping their stealth fields in perfect synchronization, forming a wall of metal and weapons that stretched across the entire approach to the inner system. 4,000 human warships faced the Zithrani fleet, and every single one of them was charging weapons. Kefsover stared at the display in disbelief, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. This was impossible. Humans did not have 4,000 warships. Their entire military was supposed to consist of outdated vessels barely capable of system defense. Where had these ships come from? "Open a channel," he commanded, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Demand their immediate surrender." The communications officer worked frantically at his console. "Admiral, they are not responding to hails. I am detecting massive energy buildups across their fleet. They are preparing to fire." In that moment, Admiral Kefsover understood that he had made a terrible mistake. He had believed the intelligence reports, trusted the Council's assessment of human capabilities, assumed that 3 centuries of subjugation had broken the spirit of these strange, stubborn creatures. He had been wrong, and now his fleet was going to pay the price. "All ships, emergency evasive maneuvers," he shouted. "Return fire at will." But it was already too late. The human fleet opened fire simultaneously, and the darkness of space lit up with weapons that should not have existed. Kinetic rounds accelerated to 12% of light speed tore through Zithrani shields like they were made of paper. Energy beams of unknown configuration sliced through hull armor as if it were soft wood. Missiles that somehow evaded every countermeasure detonated against engine compartments and weapons arrays. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as the first impact struck, and Kefsover was thrown from his throne. Around him, crew members screamed as consoles exploded and bulkheads began to buckle. He tried to give orders, tried to organize some kind of resistance, but the chaos was too great. 11 minutes after the battle began, it was over. 200 Zithrani warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris, their crews dead or dying in the cold vacuum of space. Not a single human vessel had been destroyed, and only a handful had taken any damage at all. Admiral Kethsover died when the Eternal Dominion's reactor breached, but not before he managed to transmit a final message to the Council. They were waiting for us. They have weapons we cannot match. Warn the others. The message reached Station Nexus Prime within hours, and the reaction was immediate and catastrophic. High Arbiter Kethvaler called an emergency session of the Council, his composure finally cracking as he faced the assembled representatives. "This changes nothing," he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "We will assemble a larger fleet. We will bring the full might of the elder races against these upstart mammals." But the assembly was not listening to him anymore. Councillor Vethana of the Valorian hegemony rose from her seat, her tall form towering over the other delegates. The Valorians had been a spacefaring species for 8,000 years, but they had never been admitted to the inner circle of elder races. Like humanity, they paid tribute and accepted restrictions on their development. Like humanity, they had grown tired of waiting. "The Valorian hegemony will not participate in any military action against humanity," she announced, her voice ringing through the chamber. "We have watched this council abuse its power for too long. The humans have shown us that resistance is possible. We will not help you crush them." Shock rippled through the assembly, but before Kethvaler could respond, another voice joined the chorus. "The Kethmari Collective stands with the Valorians," declared Ambassador Tethic, his insectoid form bristling with defiance. "For centuries, we have been denied the resources to develop our worlds while the elder races grew fat on our labor. If the humans can break free from your chains, perhaps we can too." One by one, other species began to speak, voices that had been silent for millennia, finally finding the courage to object. The Oravani, the Silthine, the Mekthar, the Genvari, 17 species in total, withdrew their support from the Council's proposed military coalition. Kethvaler watched his carefully constructed power structure begin to crumble, and for the first time in his 600 years of life, he felt genuine fear. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The younger species were supposed to remain obedient, grateful for the scraps the elder races chose to give them. They were not supposed to rebel. Councillor Yeth Anna of the Tolvari stood slowly, her silver skin pale with exhaustion. She had argued against the harsh treatment of humanity for decades, warning that such cruelty would eventually backfire. No one had listened, and now her worst predictions were coming true. "We created this," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. 300 years of injustice, and you believed they would simply accept it forever. You stripped their colonies of resources, humiliated their ambassadors, murdered their leaders when they became too troublesome. Did you really think there would be no consequences? She turned to face Kethvaler directly, her eyes burning with accusation. "The humans did not start this war, we did. We have been waging it against them since the day they joined the Council. Now, they are finally fighting back, and we have no one to blame but ourselves." Kethvaler tried to respond, tried to reassert his authority, but the damage was done. The coalition he had hoped to build against humanity was falling apart before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread faster than any government could control. Young species who had accepted their inferior status for generations began to ask questions. If the humans could resist the Council, why couldn't they? If the elder races could be defeated, what else had they been lying about? The cracks in the old order were spreading, and soon they would become impossible to repair. On the bridge of the TSS Defiance, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin received reports of the political chaos sweeping through Council space. She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction, but she knew the fight was far from over. "This is only the beginning," she told Commander Okonkwo. "We have broken their fleet, but now we must break their lies. Prepare the ambassador for her return to Nexus Prime. It is time for Phase 2. The breaking had begun, and there was no going back." Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to Station Nexus Prime 3 weeks after the destruction of the Zithrani fleet. But she did not come as a humble petitioner begging for scraps of dignity. She came as the voice of a species that had finally found its strength. 300 human warships escorted her transport, the DSS Defiance leading the formation like a wolf at the head of its pack. They took up positions around the station, their weapons powered down but their presence impossible to ignore. Every species watching understood the message. Humanity could have destroyed Nexus Prime at any moment, but they had chosen to talk instead. The Great Hall was packed when Elena entered, every seat filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Many of them had traveled for weeks to witness this moment, knowing that something historic was about to happen. The air crackled with tension and anticipation. High Arbiter Kethvalar sat in his usual position at the center of the assembly, but his posture was no longer proud and commanding. His carapace seemed dull, his movements slow and uncertain. The defeat of the Zithrani fleet had shaken him badly, and the defection of so many species from his coalition had shaken him even more. Elena walked to the center of the chamber, but she did not take her place on the petitioner's platform. Instead, she stood on the main floor, facing the council as an equal rather than a supplicant. In her hand, she carried a single datapad, small enough to fit in her palm, but containing enough information to destroy an empire. 3 centuries ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, humanity made contact with the Galactic Council. We were young and hopeful, eager to learn from species that had traveled to stars for thousands of years before us. We believed that joining your community would bring peace and prosperity to our people. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Around her, thousands of eyes watched and waited. Instead, you treated us like animals to be managed, resources to be exploited, a threat to be contained. You stripped our colonies of minerals and food, leaving our people hungry while your warehouses overflowed. You limited our technology, our population, our very right to exist as a free species. Kethvalar rose from his seat, his voice sharp with anger. You were probationary. All young species must prove themselves before earning full membership. This is the way it has always been. Elena smiled, and there was something cold and dangerous in that expression. Yes, let us talk about the way it has always been. Let us talk about what happens to species that try to prove themselves too quickly. She activated the datapad, and suddenly the chamber's display screens lit up with images, documents, and recordings that made several representatives gasp in shock. 47 years ago, Ambassador Marcus Chun of Earth presented evidence that humanity was ready for full membership. He had documented our scientific achievements, our cultural development, our commitment to peaceful coexistence. His petition was gaining support among the younger species. She swiped the screen, and a new image appeared, a formal council document marked with classified seals. 1 week before the vote, Ambassador Chun died in what was officially recorded as a shuttle accident. This document, recovered from Council intelligence archives, shows that his shuttle was sabotaged by Zithrani agents operating under orders from the High Arbiter's office. Chaos erupted in the chamber, but Elena pressed on, her voice rising above the noise. Marcus Chen was not the first, and he was not the last. Over 3 centuries, 17 human leaders who pushed for equality were eliminated by Council agents. Every time we came close to achieving our goals, something happened to set us back. We thought it was bad luck, but it was murder. She swiped again, and more documents appeared. But humanity was not the only victim. The Council has been doing this to every species that threatens their power structure. Now she turned to face the Valorian delegation, her eyes meeting Councillor Vathana as across the crowded floor. 60 years ago, the Valorian hegemony developed a new propulsion system that would have revolutionized space travel. Council agents stole the research and destroyed the laboratory. 300 Valorian scientists died in what was called an accident. Here is the proof. The Valorian representatives stared at the documents in horror, recognizing names and dates that had been seared into their collective memory. The laboratory disaster had been a national tragedy, one that had set their technological development back by decades. Now they learned it had been deliberate. Elena continued, relentless and merciless. The Kethmari were denied terraforming technology because they were becoming too populous. The Silthine had their trade routes restricted because they were becoming too wealthy. The Oravani were forced to abandon 3 colony worlds because they were too close to Elder Race territory. Document after document appeared on the screens, each one more damning than the last. Assassination orders, economic sabotage plans, military intervention strategies. The entire history of council governance was revealed as a massive system of exploitation and control, designed to keep the elder races in power forever. You called us a probationary species, Elena said, her voice now quiet but carrying to every corner of the chamber. You told us we were too young, too aggressive, too dangerous to be trusted. But you were never afraid of what we might become. You were afraid of what we might reveal. She held up the datapad, that small device containing 3 centuries of accumulated evidence. This is called the Reckoning, and we are broadcasting it on every frequency, to every species in council space. Your secrets are no longer secret. Your lies are no longer believed. Your power is no longer absolute. High Arbiter Kethvola had gone completely still, his compound eyes fixed on the screens that displayed his species' crimes for all to see. He had spent 600 years building the council's power, carefully managing the younger species, ensuring that none of them ever became strong enough to challenge the elder races. Now it was all falling apart. Humanity did not come here to conquer, Elena continued. We could have destroyed this station and everyone in it. We chose not to. We could have swept through council space with our fleet, taking whatever we wanted. We chose not to. Do you know why? She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of species after species, seeing hope where there had only been despair before. Because we are not you. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want to exploit the weak or silence the voices of those who disagree with us. We want something far more dangerous. We want justice. The word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap, and in its wake, something fundamental changed. Representatives who had spent their entire lives accepting the council's authority began to realize that another way was possible. The old order is finished, Elena declared. What comes next is up to all of us, but it will not include those who built their empires on suffering and lies. You can join us in creating something better, or you can be swept away by the tide of history. The choice is yours. She turned and walked toward the exit, just as she had done weeks before. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her, representatives from dozens of species rose from their seats and followed, leaving the elder races sitting in stunned silence. The revelation was complete, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Elena Vasquez broadcast the reckoning to the galaxy, and in that time, everything had changed. The old Galactic Council was gone, dissolved by its own members as the truth of its crimes spread from world to world. Populations that had accepted their place for millennia rose up and demanded change. Governments that had collaborated with the elder races fell overnight. 1,000 years of carefully maintained hierarchy collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Some of the elder races tried to resist, assembling fleets and threatening war against any species that defied their authority. They learned quickly that the galaxy was no longer afraid of them. The Terran Defense Armada, now reinforced by ships from the Valorian hegemony and a dozen other former subject species, crushed every attempt at military restoration. High Arbiter Kethvala fled Nexus Prime when the station's own security forces turned against him. He made it halfway to the Galactic Rim before a Valorian patrol intercepted his ship. Now he sat in a holding cell on Earth, awaiting trial for crimes against sapient species. Many of the other architects of the old regime faced similar fates. Some were captured and brought to justice. Others died trying to escape. A few managed to disappear into the vast darkness between stars, but they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, knowing that the galaxy no longer had any place for them. Station Nexus Prime still stood at the heart of Council space, its crystal halls now filled with a very different assembly. Over 200 species had sent representatives to the founding conference of the Interstellar Compact, a new governing body built on principles that the old council would have found incomprehensible. Every species would have an equal voice, regardless of how long they had traveled the stars. There would be no probationary periods, no tribute payments, no restrictions on development. Disputes would be settled through negotiation and arbitration, not military force or political manipulation. The strong would protect the weak, and the advanced would help the developing. It was idealistic, perhaps even naive, but after 12,000 years of oppression disguised as civilization, the galaxy was ready to try something different. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood at the window of her quarters aboard the Defiance, watching the streams of ships arriving for the founding conference. She had removed her uniform for the first time in months, wearing simple civilian clothes that felt strange after so many years of military service. A soft chime announced a visitor, and she turned to find Commander James Okonkwo standing in the doorway, a hesitant smile on his face. "The Parliament has made its decision," he said. "The Terran Defense Armada will be maintained but reduced to peacekeeping levels. They want you to serve as its commander for the transition period, then retire with full honors." Chum nodded slowly, unsurprised. The fleet had served its purpose, and humanity no longer needed to hide behind walls of warships. And the hidden colonies? They will be revealed over the next decade, gradually integrated into the new galactic community. The Parliament believes that keeping them secret any longer would undermine the trust we are trying to build. That was wise. Chun had always known that humanity's secrets would eventually have to come into the light. Better to do it on their own terms than to have it discovered later. "What about you?" she asked. "What will you do now that the war is over?" Okonkwo laughed, a sound of genuine joy that Chun had not heard from him in years. "I am going home. My grandmother is still alive on the Mars colony. I have not seen her in 15 years. It is time to remember what we were fighting for." Chun smiled and clasped his shoulder. "Give her my regards. You have earned your rest, old friend." After he left, she stood alone at the window for a long time, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. So many had sacrificed so much, giving their lives so that future generations could live in freedom. She hoped they would be proud of what had been achieved. In the great hall below, Ambassador Elena Vasquez took her place at the central podium. She was no longer merely the voice of humanity, but had been elected as the first speaker of the Interstellar Compact, chosen by unanimous vote to lead the new governing body through its difficult first years. She looked out at the assembled representatives, seeing faces of every shape and color, beings from 100 different worlds united by a common purpose. Many of them had been enemies just months before. Now they sat together as equals, ready to build something new. "We gather here at a turning point in history," Elena began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "For 12,000 years, this galaxy was ruled by those who believed that power justified any crime, that the strong had the right to exploit the weak. That order could only be maintained through fear and oppression." She paused, letting her words sink in. Around her, thousands of representatives listened in absolute silence. That era is over. Not because humanity defeated the old council in battle, but because all of us, together, chose to reject the lies we had been told. We chose to believe that a better way was possible. We chose to fight for it. She thought of her grandfather, who had been so hopeful when humanity first joined the galactic community. He had died believing that dream was impossible, but he had been wrong. It had just taken 3 centuries longer than anyone expected. The path ahead will not be easy. There will be conflicts and disagreements and moments when we are tempted to return to the old ways. Building trust between species that have been enemies for generations is the work of decades, perhaps centuries. She smiled, and this time there was warmth in it, genuine hope that she had not felt in years. But we have already proven that we can achieve the impossible. We have already shown that courage and determination can overcome even the oldest and most powerful forces of oppression. She raised her hand, gesturing to the assembled representatives. Today, we begin the work of creating a galaxy where every species is valued, where every voice is heard, where justice is not a privilege of the powerful but a right of all sapient beings. The chamber erupted in applause, a thunderous roar that shook the crystal walls of Nexus Prime. Representatives who had been voiceless for millennia stood and cheered, their hopes and dreams finally acknowledged after so many years of silence. Far above the station, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin watched from the window of the Defiance as celebrations spread across the docking bays and habitat rings. Ships from 100 worlds flew in formation, their running lights creating patterns of color against the darkness of space. She thought about the 2 words that had started all of this, the simple declaration that had brought an empire to its knees. No negotiations. It had been a statement of defiance, a refusal to accept the unacceptable any longer. But now she understood that it had been something more. It had been a declaration of faith in humanity's ability to create something better, a belief that they deserved more than the scraps the Council had offered. And they had been right. The Third Galactic Age had begun, and while it would not be perfect, while there would be struggles and setbacks and difficult compromises, it would be built on a foundation of equality and justice that the old order had never known. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had liberated it. They had shown every oppressed species that resistance was possible, that tyrants could be defeated. That hope was not foolish, but essential. And it had all started with 2 words spoken by a species that had been underestimated one time too many. No negotiations. No surrender. No going back. The new dawn had arrived.